The world shimmered into view, with a quiet hum. Blocks of grass, trees, and sky formed around a single point where a lone figure blinked into existence. The air was calm, touched with the scent of fresh leaves and the soft rustle of wind brushing through pixelated trees. He had no memory of where he came from, only that this world felt safe. The sky above was pale blue, the kind that promised an endless day ahead. Square clouds drifted lazily across it. The ground beneath his feet was springy with grass blocks, dotted with red and yellow flowers swaying gently in the breeze. In the distance, hills rolled into forests, and forests into faint mountain outlines, all wrapped in a gentle peace. He took his first step. The soft crunch of his feet against the earth felt oddly satisfying. He glanced around. No mobs, no rush, just time. He noticed a small pond to his right, the water flat and glassy like polished stone, reflecting the sun overhead. A single birch tree stood nearby, tall and proud. "All right," he murmured to himself with a sleepy smile, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let's see what this world has for me." Nearby, a chicken clucked and waddled past without a care in the world. He wandered toward a small clearing and placed his hand against a tree, an oak this time. It was warm under the sun, the bark rough but familiar. He took a deep breath, then began gathering wood. The thuds echoed softly through the quiet woods, blending with bird song and the faint sound of a waterfall somewhere nearby. Before long, he had a stack of planks, a crafting table, and a few basic tools. He didn't rush. Each moment was slow, intentional. This wasn't a world for survival, not right now. This was a world for resting, building, and becoming. He wandered farther, deeper into the woods, until the trees opened to reveal a gentle valley. A stream meandered through it, curving between tall grass and lilac. Bees floated lazily from one flower to the next. A patch of pumpkins sat in a tidy row on the far side. "This," he said softly, "feels like home." And so he began. He laid the first blocks, spruce logs forming the corners, oak planks filling the walls. His house wouldn't be grand, just a cozy cottage nestled in the hillside, warm and humble. The kind of place where one could listen to the rain, sip hot cocoa, and fall asleep without a single worry. As the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting amber light across the grass, he placed the final plank of the roof. Lanterns flickered to life, hanging from fence posts and hooks, glowing with soft orange light. The valley hummed with peace. He stepped inside, placed his bed by the window, and curled beneath the warm covers. Fireflies danced just outside the glass. The stars blinked into existence overhead, slow and dreamlike. He closed his eyes. The world whispered around him. Tomorrow, he'd explore more, maybe build a garden, find some sheep, dig into the side of the mountain. But tonight was just for resting. And the cozy Minecraft world held him gently, like a dream he never wanted to end. The sun rose slowly over the blocky horizon, bathing the valley in gold. Soft rays spilled through the cottage window, warming the wooden floor and reaching the side of the bed where he still lay, half dreaming. Birds chirped gently outside. The stream bubbled, playful and serene. He stretched beneath the quilted covers, opened one eye, and smiled. Morning in this world was unlike anywhere else. There was no pressure, no alarms, just the steady rhythm of nature, softly nudging him awake. With a quiet yawn, he sat up and looked around. The inside of his little house glowed in the morning light. The wooden walls were smooth and warm. A lantern still flickered faintly above the crafting table. He had placed a few flower pots on the windowsill last night, filled with daisies and poppies he found nearby. He stepped outside. The dew sparkled on the grass, and everything smelled fresh, like wet earth in springtime. Bees buzzed in lazy circles near the lilacs. A fox darted through the trees beyond the stream, too quick to follow, but slow enough to catch a glimpse of its orange tail. Today felt like a day for tending to simple things. He decided to begin with the garden. Near the edge of the stream, The soil was soft and rich. He cleared a small patch, smoothing the ground with careful strokes, and planted the seeds he had gathered the day before: wheat, beetroot, and carrots. As he worked, the sun climbed higher, warming his back. He placed a tiny scarecrow nearby, built from a fence post, a carved pumpkin, and a floppy old leather cap he'd found in a ruined chest beneath a birch tree. He chuckled softly at how the scarecrow leaned slightly to one side, as if it were as sleepy as he was. Next, he wandered toward the hillside to gather stone. Not far from his home, the mountain began to rise gently, and at its base he found a shallow cave. No darkness, no danger, just cool air and smooth, pale stone. He collected cobblestone and coal, humming a gentle tune to himself as he worked. Returning to his home, he crafted a furnace and placed it beside the crafting table. He lit it with care, the coal catching with a warm hiss and glow. Soon, he had baked his first loaf of bread, and the smell filled the tiny house with comfort. He sat on the steps of his cottage, the loaf in his hand, and watched the clouds drift overhead. The wind blew gently through the valley, rustling leaves and grass, carrying the faint scent of pine and wild flowers. A sheep bleated softly nearby. He turned and saw a small group grazing along the hillside, their wool soft and fluffy. He smiled and rose to meet them, moving slowly, offering a bit of wheat in his hand. They followed him home. He built a little pen beside the house, using spruce fences and mossy cobblestone to give it character. The sheep bleated contentedly inside, already settling in. He patted one on the head gently. "Welcome home," he whispered. As the sun began its slow descent once more, painting the sky in shades of lavender and peach, he stood back and looked at everything he had built. It was still small, just a house, a garden, a pen, and a valley. But it was his, and it was enough. He stepped inside, closed the wooden door behind him, and slipped back into bed. The stars outside twinkled softly, mirrored by the gentle flicker of the lantern above his head. And as his eyes grew heavy again, he thought, "This is only the beginning." The next morning, the air carried a quiet thrill, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something just beyond the trees. He woke slowly, the way one wakes in a place where time has no sharp edges. Outside, soft clouds drifted past the sun, painting the ground in shifting patches of light and shade. The valley stretched out in peaceful stillness, as if it too had slept through the night. Today, he felt the pull of exploration. He packed lightly a few loaves of bread, a wooden sword, and his favorite stone pickaxe, then stepped out into the world beyond his little home. The garden rustled behind him, the sheep bleated lazily in the pen, and the stream whispered its constant, soothing song. He followed the stream. It wound through the grass, under arching trees, and eventually disappeared into a forest dense with dark oak and birch. The trees grew taller here, their leaves thick and heavy, blocking the sky in patches. Shadows pooled at their roots, cool and deep, but not frightening, just mysterious. He walked quietly, careful not to startle the birds perched high above or the rabbits that darted through the underbrush. Every now and then, he would hear the soft creak of the trees or the call of a crow in the distance. Then, he saw it, a small clearing surrounded by giant mushrooms, red and white, with spots like sugar on top. The mushrooms towered above him like umbrellas. In the center of the clearing, moss grew thick on the stone, and a tiny pool glistened in the middle, fed by a slow trickle of water from a nearby rock face. The air here smelled like rain and earth and something older, like magic, but gentle. He knelt beside the pool and dipped his hand into the water. It was cold, but clear. A few silver fish darted away, then returned, curious. There were no signs of danger, no footsteps or broken twigs, just the steady rhythm of a quiet world, untouched. He took a breath and let it out slowly. Then he sat on the moss, leaned back against a tree, and let himself rest. Birds chirped overhead, and the forest wrapped around him like a blanket. Time passed softly. He wasn't sure how long he sat there, watching the sun shift through the leaves. But when he finally stood, he felt something new in him, a calm sense of wonder, like the forest had whispered secrets just for him. He continued his walk, eventually finding a small abandoned campsite, a stone fire pit surrounded by mossy cobble. A few wild berries grew around the edges. Someone had once stayed here, long ago, but it had been left to the forest now. He picked a few berries and left a loaf of bread on the stone, just in case the world was still listening. By the time he returned home, the sky was pink and gold again. He placed a mushroom on the crafting table and smiled. Maybe tomorrow he'd build a little trail through the wood's soft lanterns on fence posts, signs to guide the way, a bench beside that mossy pool. Deeper into the woods, the air grew cooler and more still. Shadows played across the moss, and the quiet deepened, not in a frightening way, but like a story waiting to be told. He reached the clearing just as the sun broke through the treetops, casting golden light across the mushroom caps and onto the pool. It shimmered like glass, undisturbed and eternal. Here, he placed the final lantern. It hung from a curved log, swaying ever so slightly in the breeze, its light flickering over the water like a dancing firefly. He sat beside it, letting the silence settle into him. He could feel the difference already. The path had changed the space. It no longer felt like a secret lost in time. It felt like a place remembered. He closed his eyes for a moment and leaned against the log. The forest held him gently. By the time he walked home, the sky had begun to turn orange once more, and the lanterns he placed began to glow, one by one, in the growing dusk. From the edge of the forest, he turned back and looked. The path was soft and golden, stretching into the trees like a trail of dreams. Back inside, he sat on the porch and watched the valley dim into evening. Fireflies blinked between the flowers. The stream whispered its endless lullaby. And for the first time, he felt that the world itself had started to remember him too. He lit one last lantern beside the front door. Its light was small, but steady. Like hope. Like home. The next morning, a light fog had settled over the valley. It wrapped around the trees and hovered above the ground, softening every edge, turning the world into a watercolor dream. His home, his garden, and even the path to the forest looked like they belonged to another time, somewhere between memory and magic. He stood on the porch with a mug of something warm in his hands, watching as the fog danced and drifted. Then he saw movement. It wasn't sudden or alarming, just a quiet figure walking the lantern-lit path from the woods, their shape barely visible through the mist. His heart didn't leap in fear, it softened in curiosity. The figure came closer. They wore a brown cloak with a hood, their steps slow and careful, as if they, too, didn't want to disturb the peace. When they finally emerged from the fog, they paused at the foot of his garden, looking around with the expression of someone who had been searching for something and perhaps had finally found it. He stepped down from the porch. "Hello," he said gently. The visitor looked up and smiled, eyes warm and curious. "I didn't expect to find anyone here." "I didn't expect a guest," he replied, mirroring the smile. There was a quiet moment between them, the kind of moment that doesn't need to be filled with words. Then, the visitor stepped closer and looked around at the house, the garden, the pen of sleepy sheep. "This place," they said softly, "it feels like it was grown, not built." He looked back at it, then nodded. "It's been a quiet kind of growing." They both laughed, not loudly, but enough to warm the fog between them. He invited the visitor in. Inside the cottage, the fire crackled. He offered bread and berries, and they sat on the floor, backs against the wall, sharing stories as if they had always been meant to meet. The visitor's name was Mira, and she had spawned far to the north, in a snowy tundra that stretched endlessly into white silence. "I wandered for days," she said, sipping from the makeshift tea mug. "Then I saw the lanterns. They led me here." He looked toward the forest path and smiled. "I guess I built them for both of us." The fog lingered through the afternoon, softening the light outside. They walked the path together, Mira marveling at the mushrooms, the moss, the way the lanterns seemed to glow brighter as the day dimmed. That evening, she built a small tent beside the cottage, made from wool and spruce. Not far, just close enough to hear the stream and the rustle of leaves. He helped her place a lantern at the entrance. "You can stay as long as you like," he said. Mira looked up at the stars, just beginning to blink into view. "Maybe I will." And that night, two dreams unfolded under the same roof of sky, one old, one new, but both wrapped in lantern light and silence, in a world where every block held warmth, and even the fog knew how to carry a friend home. The following morning felt different, brighter, warmer, and filled with quiet laughter even before the sun had fully risen. Mira was already awake, sitting cross-legged outside her small tent, watching the mist rise from the stream. She turned as he stepped out of the cottage, her face lit by the soft glow of the early sun. "Morning," she said, her voice carrying the calm of someone who'd slept deeply. "Morning," he replied with a grin. "You're up early." "I didn't want to waste a day like this," she said, gesturing toward the valley, where sunlight poured over the hills like melted gold. He sat beside her on the damp grass, the earth cool beneath his hands. For a moment, they said nothing, just listened to the sound of water and the distant bleating of sheep. It felt like they had known each other far longer than a single night. Mira pointed toward the forest path, its lantern still faintly glowing. "You've built something special here," she said, "but I think we can make it even cozier." He laughed softly. "Are you saying my little cottage isn't cozy enough?" "Not at all," she said, smirking. "But what if we add a garden fence, maybe a flower arch over the path? Oh, and a fishing dock by the stream." The ideas spilled out of her like sunlight, and he found himself nodding along, feeling that same spark of creation he had felt on his first day here. But now it was stronger, because he wasn't alone. They started with the garden fence. Together, they gathered spruce logs and crafted fences, laughing when Mira accidentally placed one sideways. The fence wrapped around the garden in neat lines, with lanterns on each corner post. Then Mira began working on the flower arch, weaving together vines and hanging lanterns so that anyone entering the path would feel like they were stepping into a secret world. By midday, they moved to the stream. The sound of rushing water was soothing as they built a small dock with oak planks and smooth stone slabs. Mira carved out a little bench at the end, while he placed lanterns along the edge, their reflections dancing on the water's surface. "You know," she said, sitting on the bench with her feet hovering just above the water, "I think this might be my favorite place." "It's hard to argue with that," he said, handing her a fishing rod he had just crafted. "Want to try?" She smiled, taking the rod. "Only if you join me." And so they sat together, side by side, casting lines into the stream as the sun slowly sank toward the horizon. The lanterns along the path began to glow again, their soft orange light guiding the way back home. That evening, Mira surprised him with a gift, a small book she had found on her travels, filled with blank pages. "For your plans," she said, "or stories, or whatever you want to remember." He turned the book in his hands, feeling the rough cover. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This means more than you know." As night fell, they sat on the porch, watching fireflies flicker in the tall grass. The valley felt alive, like it had grown bigger just because there were now two hearts beating within it. Before bed, Mira looked up at the stars and said, "Tomorrow, let's build something new." He smiled, already picturing what the world could become. The next morning, the sky stretched clear and endless, brushed with the soft pastels of dawn. The valley glowed under the sun's slow rise, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers and damp earth. Mira was already awake, perched on the porch steps, sketching in the dirt with a stick. "I had an idea," she said as he approached, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Oh?" he asked, settling beside her. "A treehouse," she said simply, grinning. "High up, somewhere quiet, a place to read, rest, and watch the stars." He blinked slowly, then smiled. "I love it." They packed what they needed: ladders, slabs, trapdoors, fences, and stacks of logs, and followed the stream into the forest. The trees here grew taller than any near the cottage. thick trunks, heavy leaves, and branches that formed a woven ceiling high above the mossy floor. Eventually, they found the one. A towering oak stood at the heart of a grove, its limbs stretching wide and strong. It was perfect, ancient, and peaceful, as if it had been waiting for them all along. They worked slowly, carefully, making sure not to harm the tree more than needed. He built the ladder while Mira shaped the base platform, balancing across beams with playful ease. Together, they crafted a floor that curved around the trunk like a nest. The sounds of the forest surrounded them, birds singing, wind rustling leaves, and the faint echo of their laughter. They added walls of planks and glass panes, leaving large open windows to let the light in. A trapdoor hatch led down to the ladder, and a small balcony extended from the front, framed with railings and a lantern at each corner. Inside, they laid down wool carpets, cozy chairs, and a reading nook with bookshelves made from scavenged wood and mossy stone. Mira placed a flower pot on the windowsill, while he set a chest in the corner, half filled with apples and bread. The final touch was a bed beneath the slanted roof, tucked beneath a skylight where stars could be seen even while lying down. By the time they finished, the sun had drifted to late afternoon, casting golden light across the treetops. They sat on the balcony, legs dangling over the edge, the whole world below glowing like a peaceful dream. "It's even better than I imagined," Mira whispered. He nodded. "It feels weightless, like nothing bad could reach us up here." As evening settled in, they lit the lanterns and watched as the forest dimmed. Fireflies floated below like drifting sparks, and in the distance, the path of lanterns through the forest blinked faintly, guiding the way home. Mira leaned her head on his shoulder, eyes soft. "Let's sleep here tonight." He smiled, his voice no louder than the wind through the leaves. "Let's—" And as they curled beneath the blankets, high above the quiet world, the tree creaked gently in the breeze, as if whispering them to sleep. The stars blinked overhead, and the forest, as always, kept watch. Sleep came easily in the treehouse. The wind rocked the world ever so slightly, as if the tree itself was swaying to the rhythm of their breath. Through the skylight above, stars shimmered like scattered diamonds, and the moon poured silver light across the wooden floor. He stirred only once in the night, woken by the sound of distant owls and the rustle of leaves. Mira was still asleep beside him, her breathing slow and steady. A lantern flickered gently from its hook on the wall, casting a warm glow that chased the shadows into corners. He smiled, pulled the blanket up a little higher, and drifted off again. When they awoke, the morning sky was pale lavender and streaked with soft gold. Mist hovered over the treetops, and far below, the valley was still. From this high perch, the world felt untouched, as if it had paused just for them. They sat on the balcony in silence, sipping tea, wrapped in cloaks. The stream's whisper reached even this high, rising with the breeze. Bees had already begun their slow journey from flower to flower, and a distant wolf's howl faded into the air like a forgotten echo. "It's hard to leave a place like this," Mira said quietly. He nodded. "Then let's make it easier to return." They climbed down slowly, their boots tapping against the wooden rungs of the ladder, landing softly on the mossy ground. Back at the cottage, the garden had flourished overnight, and the sheep greeted them with sleepy bleats. That day, they decided to make the world a little smaller in the best way. They built a cobblestone path from the cottage to the treehouse, winding gently through the forest. Along the way, they added new lanterns, tiny wooden signs, and even a bench beneath a large birch tree. Mira carved the word "lookout" into one of the signs, pointing toward the canopy above. At midday, they paused by the stream, watching the fish dart through the water. He skipped a stone across its surface, and Mira laughed when it bounced 3 times before sinking. They foraged for sweet berries and planted new patches around the garden fence. Together, they crafted another scarecrow, this one with a carved grin and a floppy feather hat. Back at the treehouse, Mira added curtains made from wool dyed with flowers, deep blues and warm purples, while he built a small bookshelf for their growing collection of books. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Every block placed was a quiet conversation. Every glance, every smile, another sentence in a story only they could hear. That night, they slept at the cottage again. But before bed, they stood on the porch and looked up toward the forest, where a warm dot of light blinked gently among the trees, the treehouse lantern, still glowing. The world was spreading gently around them, not like a conquest, but like roots growing deeper, curling into the earth, making it home. And as they closed the door and curled beneath the blankets, the valley breathed with them. Everything was right. Everything was peaceful. Days passed in a soft rhythm, like pages turning in a favorite book. The garden grew richer, the treehouse more lived in, and the forest paths wore in beneath their feet. Each morning came with birdsong, each evening with the warm hush of lanterns flickering to life. Then, one bright afternoon, as they explored a ridge just beyond the hills behind the cottage, Mira paused, her hand gently gripping a vine-covered oak. "Look," she whispered, pointing between two trees. In the distance, barely visible through the branches, was the outline of rooftops. Not logs or planks they had placed themselves, but clay and cobble and hay roofs shaped by many hands. A village. Neither of them had expected it. The world had felt so quiet, so secluded. It hadn't seemed possible that other souls might be near. But there it was, peaceful and small, nestled between meadows and fields of wheat that swayed in the breeze like golden rivers. He turned to her. "Should we visit?" Mira nodded slowly. "Let's bring bread." They returned to the cottage, gathering supplies, loaves of fresh bread, a few apples, and bundles of wildflowers from their garden. Mira tied the stems with bits of twine, humming softly as she worked. He crafted a small sign with a carved message, "Hello," from the valley beyond. With packs slung over their shoulders, they followed the worn trail into the meadow, their boots brushing through tall grass and wild daisies. The air smelled like sun-warmed wheat and clover, and the breeze carried faint sounds, laughter, clanging bells, the bark of a dog. As they reached the village's edge, a farmer looked up from his field. His square face broke into a broad smile beneath his straw hat. "Travelers?" he called, voice rich and warm. "Neighbors," Mira answered, holding out a loaf. The welcome was instant and kind. The villagers gathered with curiosity, offering stew and sweet berries in exchange for the bread and flowers. Children giggled and chased each other near the well. An old librarian invited them to see the town's tiny library, its shelves lined with handwritten books and forgotten maps. They learned the village was called Amberfell, a place tucked quietly into the world like a bookmark left in an old story. No one here had left in a long time. The villagers had believed they were the last for miles. Mira and he exchanged a glance. "Not anymore," he said. They spent the afternoon helping harvest wheat and repairing fences. Mira fixed a broken lantern outside the library, while he helped rebuild part of a crumbling stone path. When it was time to leave, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across Amberfell's fields. The villagers gathered to wave goodbye, their faces lit with hope. "We'll visit again," Mira promised. "And we'll bring stories next time," he added with a wink. They followed the trail home beneath the orange sky, walking slowly, letting the cool breeze guide them back to their valley. That night, as they sat on the treehouse balcony with warm tea in their hands, Mira whispered, "I didn't think this world had more in it." He smiled. "It always does." Below them, the lantern path flickered gently. Above them, the stars blinked, ancient and kind. And somewhere far beyond the trees, a village named Amberfell slept peacefully, no longer alone in the wide world. The next morning, dew sparkled on the grass, and a gentle breeze danced through the leaves, carrying the distant scent of hay and chimney smoke. The valley felt different, still calm, still theirs, but now with the soft echo of something greater beyond it. Amberfell wasn't just a village on a map. It was a thread now woven into the story of their world. He stood near the stream, staring at the slow-moving water as it curved away toward the woods. "I've been thinking," he said softly when Mira joined him, wrapping a cloak around her shoulders. She didn't answer immediately. She simply looked at him and waited. "A bridge," he continued, "from here to Amberfell. Something gentle, wooden maybe, with lanterns to guide the way. Something to connect what we've built with what we've found." Mira's eyes lit up. Yes, a lantern road, a path of peace. They got to work that very morning. First, they marked the path, choosing a route that would wind past the garden, curve by the stream, then stretch across the meadow toward the edge of the forest. It would lead all the way to the hilltop ridge where they first saw Amberfell. They gathered planks and cobblestone, lanterns and fences. Together, they began placing one block at a time. The bridge over the stream came first, a graceful arch with oak steps and hanging lanterns on curved supports. It reflected in the water below like a ribbon of light. Mira planted rows of flowers along the path, poppies, cornflowers, alliums, their colors spilling into the grass like paint on a canvas. He added benches under trees, small markers carved with messages like "Rest here" and "Breathe." By evening, the trail had reached halfway through the meadow. They paused for supper on a hill, bread and apples shared as the sun turned the fields gold. Fireflies emerged again, flickering like tiny stars among the wheat. The next morning, they built the final stretch. Mira climbed a small rise and placed the last lantern post at the ridge. From there, they could see both their valley and Amberfell's rooftops in the distance, two worlds now joined by light. The villagers saw them approaching and gathered again, amazed by the soft glowing path that now shimmered through the tall grass. Children ran up to touch the lanterns. Old farmers leaned on their shovels, smiling as if they'd seen a new season arrive. "This is beautiful," the librarian said, eyes wide behind square glasses. "It's not just for us," Mira replied. "It's for all of us." Over the next days, travelers began to walk the path, villagers exploring the forest trail for the first time in years, stopping at the mushroom glade, leaving berries at the pool as a sign of thanks. Some built tiny campsites under the stars. Others planted more flowers along the way. The valley, once silent and sleepy, now carried the quiet joy of shared footsteps and soft conversation. And one night, as Mira and he sat by the stream beneath the stars, a lantern flickering between them, she whispered, "We didn't just build a world." He turned to her. She smiled. "We built a home." The days grew shorter, and the air cooler. The once deep green of the valley shifted into warm shades of amber and gold. Trees lining the forest path turned fiery red, their leaves fluttering down like lazy sparks, carpeting the mossy ground. Autumn had arrived in their little world. He stood on the porch one morning, wrapped in a thick cloak, a steaming mug warming his hands. Mira was near the garden, collecting the last of the carrots and wheat before frost could claim them. Her breath puffed into the crisp air like smoke, and her laughter, soft and light, floated toward him. They had seen many days now, each one quiet but meaningful, each step through their world making it feel more alive, more theirs. That afternoon, they decided to decorate for the season. They lined the porch railings with pumpkins, some carved into sleepy faces, others stacked beside bundles of hay. Wreaths of golden leaves and berries were hung on the door. Mira tied little bells to fence posts so that the breeze would carry their soft chimes down the path. The forest was a marvel in fall. The lantern trail now glowed through the trees like a river of honey. Fallen leaves gathered along the path's edges, and the pool in the mushroom glade reflected the changing canopy above like a painted mirror. At the treehouse, they added thicker curtains, replaced their thin blankets with wool quilts dyed in marigold and plum, and stacked a chest full of dried apples and bread. A chimney had been added weeks ago, and it now puffed gently into the sky, a curl of white against the orange treetops. Amberfell, too, changed with the season. The villagers held a small harvest festival near the town square, and Mira and he were invited to join. Lanterns hung from every post, music played from old instruments, and tables were lined with pies. roasted vegetables, and hot cider. They danced slowly beneath the stars, feet brushing through leaves, smiles glowing in the candlelight. Later that night, back in the valley, they sat beside the stream, a soft blanket wrapped around their shoulders. "Do you ever think about what came before this?" Mira asked quietly, watching the water. "Sometimes," he replied, "but it feels so far away, like it happened to someone else." She nodded. "Me too. I think this world helped us forget the hard things, or maybe just gave us something better to remember." He looked at her, the firelight from the lanterns casting gold across her face. "It's more than a world now," he said. "It's a life." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small stone round, smooth and painted with tiny stars. "For the bookshelf," she said, placing it in his hand. He smiled, and in the hush of autumn night, beneath a canopy of fading leaves and lanterns glowing in the mist, they sat together, not in a hurry to dream, but perfectly content to simply be. The fire crackled softly. The stars listened. And the world, still growing gently around them, offered nothing but peace. It happened overnight. They awoke to silence, not the quiet of sleep or fog, but the deep, velvety stillness that only snow can bring. He opened the cottage door to a world blanketed in white. The garden, the stream, the fences, all softened under a fresh layer of snow, as if the valley had been gently erased and redrawn in pale silver. Mira joined him, her cloak pulled tight, eyes wide with awe. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Snowflakes still drifted from the sky, slow and aimless, each one catching the light, like a tiny falling star. They stepped outside together, their boots crunching softly as they walked. The sheep were huddled in their shelter, warm beneath bundles of hay. Even the scarecrow wore a little cap of snow. The air was sharp, but not bitter. It smelled clean, and every sound felt distant, as though the world were holding its breath. Later that morning, they visited the treehouse. The forest path had changed, lanterns now glowing softly beneath snow-dusted branches, the trail barely visible under the white. Every footstep left a mark, but none felt out of place. The woods were hushed, reverent. The treehouse, nestled high in the branches, was warmer than expected. Mira added a second quilt to the bed and lit the small fire in the stove. The windows had fogged slightly from the inside, and they pressed their hands against the glass, tracing hearts and stars into the condensation. From above the canopy, the valley looked like something from a snow globe, peaceful, enclosed, timeless. That afternoon, they returned to the cottage and spent hours inside, crafting. He carved small wooden ornaments, tiny trees, stars, and animals, while Mira dyed wool into soft winter hues: icy blue, warm cocoa, cloud white. They hung garlands across the ceiling beams and stacked firewood by the door. Outside, the snowfall thickened, and lanterns glowed brighter in the growing dusk. As the wind picked up, they stood on the porch once more, wrapped in a single blanket, watching the snow fall sideways in great, lazy swirls. "I never imagined this place in winter," Mira said, "but now that it's here, it feels like it's always been part of the world." "It's like the valley is dreaming too," he replied softly. That night, they didn't need to speak much. They sat by the furnace, a warm stew simmering in a pot, their feet tucked beneath thick blankets. The fire crackled, the snow whispered against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a fox yipped once before, fading into silence. Before bed, he opened the small book Mira had given him, the one with blank pages. He wrote a single line: "Today, the world turned white, and nothing in me wished for anything else." And when they slept, it was not just rest, it was deep, glowing contentment. The snow continued to fall. The valley held them gently. And winter had begun. Days passed, and the snow stayed. The valley settled into a new rhythm, slower, quieter, yet no less alive. Each morning began with the sound of the furnace warming the cottage, the soft clinking of mugs, and the hush of fresh snow falling beyond the windows. Mira had started calling it the dreaming season, It suited everything: the long stretches of calm, the cozy evenings by candlelight, and the way the world outside seemed to move in slow, thoughtful breaths. One morning, as they shoveled a path from the garden to the stream, Mira paused, her breath puffing in the cold air. "Let's make something," she said suddenly. He looked up. "What kind of something?" "A tradition," she said. "Something we do every year from now on." The idea warmed him more than the fire ever could. They spent the next few days crafting decorations, stars cut from birch bark, glass bottles filled with glowing powder, and garlands made of dried berries and vines. Together, they strung them through the forest path, hanging stars from branches and placing little gifts beneath the mushroom trees in the glade. At the pool, now partially frozen, they left floating lanterns, tiny boats of wood and wax, drifting in slow circles beneath the silver sky. That night, they held a celebration. Just the two of them. A table was set on the porch, covered in soft cloth and lined with food: warm stew, roasted vegetables, sweet bread dusted with snow sugar. Lanterns flickered all around them, casting golden halos across the snow-covered garden. They wore scarves Mira had knitted from leftover wool, and she wore a flower crown woven from frosted vines and winter berries. They toasted with spiced cider, clinked wooden mugs, and laughed at nothing at all, just the joy of being here, together, in a world they had built block by block. As the night deepened, they exchanged small gifts. Mira gave him a hand-carved compass, not to find directions, but to mark memories. Each tick of the needle was a moment they'd lived together. He gave her a leather-bound book, this one filled with his drawings: their valley, the treehouse, Amberfell's rooftops, and her face lit by lantern light. Mira opened it slowly, touched each page like it was a treasure. "I didn't know you'd been sketching," she whispered. "I wanted to remember the days," he said. "All the quiet ones. They're the ones that matter most." Snow began to fall again, soft as breath. They danced beneath the stars, their footprints circling one another in the snow. No music but the wind, no audience but the trees. When they returned inside, the fire welcomed them like an old friend. They curled beneath the quilts, hearts full and eyes heavy. Outside, the decorations swayed gently in the wind. The dreaming season had given them something new, not just another memory, but a promise that every year, when the world turned white again, they would celebrate what they'd built, and everything still to come. Winter deepened. The days were pale and quiet, the nights long and wrapped in stars. The valley lay under a soft, endless hush, with every branch dressed in snow and every lantern glowing brighter against the chill. Inside the cottage, time moved gently. They spent mornings baking together bread, cookies shaped like leaves, even little berry pies Mira called snow bites. Afternoons passed in quiet crafts and slow reading by the fire. Sometimes they wrote not journals, not plans, but letters. Not to anyone, really. Just letters to the world, or to each other, folded and sealed in wax, tucked into jars and placed on the bookshelf. Then, one evening as they sat by the stream, frozen now, the water caught in glassy silence, Mira held up a rolled parchment. "I want to send a letter," she said softly. He raised an eyebrow. "To who?" She smiled. "To anyone. Maybe someone like us. Someone just waking up in their own world. Someone who needs to know it's okay to start slow." He didn't question it. The idea felt right, like planting a seed they'd never see grow, but knowing it would bloom somewhere, someday. That night, by candlelight, they wrote together. Mira's handwriting was soft and looping, his neat and thoughtful. The letter was simple, a message of warmth, welcome, and hope. They included a hand-drawn map of the valley, a sketch of the lantern path, a pressed flower from the garden, and a line Mira whispered as she wrote it: "The world is gentle if you let it be. Come find your own peace." They sealed it in a bottle, wrapped it in cloth, and the next day they hiked to the tallest ridge near the valley, the one where you could see all the way to Amberfell, and farther still. At the summit, the wind whistled through the pine trees. The sky was pale blue and full of slow-moving clouds. Without a word, Mira stepped forward and placed the bottle into the stream that trickled from the mountaintop, the only one still flowing in winter, fed from springs deep within the rock. They watched it drift down, spinning slowly, caught in the current. It disappeared into the woods below. "Maybe it finds someone," she said. "Maybe it just drifts," he replied. And both answers felt beautiful. They stood there for a long while, wrapped in their cloaks, watching the world turn silver in the setting sun. A fox watched them from the trees. Birds flitted from branch to branch, and far below, in the distance, the lantern path blinked softly through the snow like breadcrumbs left behind. That evening, they returned home and added a new page to the memory book. At the top, Mira wrote the first letter. Beneath it, he drew the bottle floating down the stream, surrounded by stars. That night, as they fell asleep beneath thick quilts and a glowing lantern, the valley seemed to breathe deeper, as if it too had sent a message into the world. "You are welcome here. There is room for you." The cold began to soften. Not all at once. Winter never leaves quickly, but in little signs. A single green shoot breaking through the snow near the garden. The drip of melting ice from the porch roof. The soft creak of trees stretching after a long, frozen sleep. One morning, he awoke to birdsong again. Not the occasional winter chirp, but a full, fluttering melody, joyful, free, and impossibly bright. The kind of sound that made you sit up in bed and smile without thinking. Mira was already outside when he stepped into the cool morning air. She stood barefoot in the snow, eyes closed, face tilted toward the weak but honest sun. The sky above was soft blue, and the snow had begun to retreat from the base of trees, revealing patches of muddy earth and yellowing grass. "I missed this," she said, opening her eyes. "The sound, the light, the smell of the ground waking up." He joined her, boots crunching softly, and looked out at the valley. Everything was still coated in winter, the stream still mostly frozen, the trees still bare, but beneath it all, the world was stirring. They decided to walk the path again. The lanterns still stood, many buried halfway in snow, their glow faint against the brightness of the day. They cleared each one gently, brushing off the snow, refilling the lanterns where needed. It felt like tending to memories, like saying to the world, "We're still here." At the mushroom glade, the pool was still icy, but at the edges, clear water had begun to show. The mushrooms looked the same, still vibrant and proud, as if they had slept through winter with one eye open. Back at the treehouse, they opened the windows for the first time in weeks. Fresh air poured in, crisp and sweet, carrying the scent of pine and melting frost. Mira pulled out the curtains and hung them on the railing to air. He swept the floor and shook dust from the old wool blankets. They spent the afternoon cleaning, not hurriedly, but as a ritual, a way of honoring the space that had held them through the coldest season. When the sun dipped low, they sat on the balcony once more. The sky glowed pale pink, and far below, the stream had begun to flow again, a single winding line of silver between white banks. "It's coming," Mira whispered. "Spring." He nodded, eyes on the horizon. "It always does." That evening, they returned to the cottage and lit the fire, but left the windows cracked. The scent of waking earth drifted in, mingling with the warmth of stew and the soft flicker of lanterns. Before bed, they opened the memory book and added a new page. At the top, Mira wrote, "The day the birds returned." Beneath it, he drew a single flower growing from the snow. As they drifted to sleep, the wind outside no longer howled. It whispered. The snow melted faster now. Each morning, the patches of green grew wider, stretching out from beneath trees and fences like fingers reaching for warmth. The stream sang again, no longer a whisper beneath ice, but a flowing, joyful melody that wound its way through the valley like a waking thought. Mira and he stood at the edge of the garden one morning, boots sinking slightly into damp soil. "Ready?" she asked, a wooden hoe slung over her shoulder. He nodded, holding a satchel of seeds. "Let's bring it back." The garden had slept through winter, but beneath the snow, the soil had rested, waiting. They cleared away the last of the frost, tilling the earth gently, as if waking it from a long nap. Worms squirmed to the surface, sleepy but alive. Birds fluttered nearby, curious and hungry. Together, they planted new rows: wheat, beetroot, carrots, and for the first time, potatoes. Mira added rows of lavender and sweet berry bushes along the edges, saying, "For the bees, they've earned a feast." He built new fence posts, a little taller this time, with hanging lanterns and flower boxes nailed to the corners. One post held a carved wooden sign, "The Garden of Every Season." When they finished, the sun was high, and the breeze had turned warm. They lay on the grass nearby, staring up at the clouds drifting lazily across the sky. "Feels good," he said. Mira turned her head toward him, like starting again but never losing what came before. He smiled. "Exactly." That afternoon, they walked the path to Amberfell, now mostly clear of snow. Villagers were already outside, sweeping porches and repairing rooftops. Children chased chickens through the thawing fields, and the smell of baking bread drifted from open windows. Mira delivered early spring flowers tied with string. He shared their first loaves of fresh bread. The librarian gave them a new book, hand-bound with a cover made from birch bark and wool string. Inside was a short poem. Winter ends not with silence, but with light returning softly to the soil. They walked home slowly, hand in hand, letting the fading sunlight guide them. That night, they sat on the cottage porch with mugs of sweet tea and listened to the frogs return to the stream. Stars began to blink into view, one by one, as if rediscovering the night sky. Mira leaned her head against his shoulder and said, "Let's plant a tree tomorrow." He looked at her. "Where?" She pointed toward a small hill near the sheep pen, a place where the sun hit first every morning. "A tree we can sit under in summer," she said, "and hang lanterns from in the fall." He smiled, already picturing it. Tomorrow, they would plant roots that would outlast them both. But tonight, they simply sat. The garden breathed beside them. The stars smiled above, and the world, ever so gently, kept growing. Morning came with birdsong and golden light pouring through the cottage windows. The frost was finally gone, and the earth outside felt soft underfoot, rich and ready. They spent the early hours preparing. Mira chose a sapling, a strong little oak grown from a seed she'd kept in a clay pot all winter by the fireplace. Its roots were stubborn and eager, like it had been waiting to meet the soil. He dug the hole near the crest of the hill she'd pointed to, the earth dark and damp, welcoming. They planted the tree together. Mira knelt beside the roots, gently patting the soil in place. He added a ring of cobblestone and moss around the base, marking the spot as sacred in the quiet way they'd always honored things, through care. They stepped back to admire their work. "It looks small now," she said. "It'll grow," he replied. And already, they could imagine what it would become, tall and sheltering. Its branches spread wide, like arms open to the sky. In summer, they'd sit in its shade with books and bread. In autumn, its leaves would turn gold, and lanterns would hang from every branch. In winter, it would stand proud in the snow, a beacon of warmth. For now, it stood quietly in the breeze, leaves just beginning to stretch. They named it the lantern tree. That evening, they returned with 2 lanterns and hung them low on the youngest branches. The light flickered gently in the wind, casting soft glows across the hillside. A single fox passed by below and paused, watching them from the brush before slipping away. They sat beside the tree as the sun slipped beyond the hills, casting long shadows across the garden and stream. Amber light bathed everything in calm, and the breeze carried the scent of grass and wet earth. "Do you think it'll still be here, years from now?" Mira asked. He nodded. "Long after we are." Mira reached into her bag and pulled out a small stone. She pressed it into the earth near the base of the tree. It was smooth, etched with a single word in her handwriting: "Begin." Later that night, as they curled up in the cottage once more, the glow of the lantern tree could still be seen through the window, soft, steady, golden. He added a page to the memory book, a sketch of the young sapling on the hill, with two tiny figures sitting beneath it. At the bottom he wrote, "We planted a tree today, not just for us, but for time itself." And as sleep pulled them under, the tree stood gently in the night breeze, the lantern swaying with the rhythm of dreams, whispering a promise into the quiet valley. "I will remember you." Spring turned to summer. The valley blossomed into full-color wildflowers blanketed the hills, bees hummed from bloom to bloom, and the sky stretched endlessly blue above their world. The stream flowed faster now, feeding the garden and singing as it passed under the wooden bridge they had built so long ago. The lantern tree grew taller by the week, its leaves rustling softly in the morning wind. More lanterns were added, some handcrafted, some gifted by villagers, each one a memory hanging gently in the branches. At night, the tree glowed like a beacon, a soft constellation against the dark. Mira spent more time writing letters, poems, sketches of birds and clouds. He built small benches along their path and repaired anything that showed age, not because it was broken, but because he had come to love tending to what they had made. One evening, as the sun set and the fireflies began to blink between the tall grass, they sat beneath the tree together, no words needed, just hands loosely held, the breeze brushing past them like a breath. "I think this is my favorite part," Mira said quietly. "Not the building, not the exploring, just this." He nodded. "The stillness after the song." She rested her head on his shoulder. "We could stop now, and it would still be complete." And he knew what she meant. They had planted joy, stitched a world from silence and care. They had shared bread, letters, paths, and peace. Everything else would simply be more petals on a flower already in full bloom. The stars brightened above them. Lanterns flickered like echoes of light. Far in the distance, Amberfell glowed with warmth, a village no longer forgotten. Between here and there, the lantern path still shimmered softly, winding through forest and field like a quiet memory. They stayed like that for a long time, no plans, no maps, no tomorrows. Just the hush of a world that loved them back. And when they finally rose and walked home hand in hand, the cottage greeted them as it always had, with golden light, the scent of wood smoke, and the soft creak of the door, welcoming them in. Inside, the fire crackled. Outside, the valley whispered. And above it all, the lantern tree stood tall, glowing, growing, and remembering. Forever.